The aim of art is not to represent the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. And this, and not the external manner and detail, is true reality. That's a quote from the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle, whose vastly deep understanding of life, art, and humankind still resonates with those of us alive now to read his words on an awesome meme, or in books for those of us who still dare to turn pages. Art is social justice. The Greeks knew this, and it's by no coincidence that theater, for example, and democracy began around the same time. There were divisions between 4 tribes in Greece in 534 BCE. Theater was created to remind them of their shared humanity, and it was remarkably effective. Years later, the Constitution was changed, and people were no longer identified by their heredity. Instead, they were looked at as demo, the root word of democracy, meaning people. That's right. Art is of, for, and by the people, or at least, it is the fabric of how and why it exists. Theater is just one of the tools in the artist's toolbox to mend wounds, remind us of our connectivity, and to heal hurt. Art has a rich history beyond Grecian times of sustaining hope in a world that is often divided by tribe, race, religion, culture, capitalism, discrimination, and fear, and politics. Take, for instance, the most blatant display of hate in this country, slavery. Yet slaves used art to help them cope with this abuse of humanity. Music was the largest vehicle of hope, even during their chained existence. Their freedom reigned in the harmony of a song, in the rhythm of a beat, in the enchantment of a catchy lyric. Songs were also used as codes to deliver messages throughout the slave community. In the song, Wade in the Water, it was used to tell slaves how to escape from bloodhounds into the promised land, the non-slave state Canada. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Who's that young girl dressed in red? Wade in the water. Must be the children that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Music, art was their cultural sustenance, and in many cases, it was their savior. Solomon Northrop, the author of 12 Years a Slave, wrote, "Had it not been for my beloved violin, I can scarcely conceive how I could have endured the long years of bondage." While slavery ended in 1865, social and economic oppression continued, but art lived through some of the most artistic and creative times in American history. Take the 1920s. Jazz evolved in this year, and it was also known as being the art form that was born from the blues. It was transformed from Mississippi to Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, and other southern states. Films and cinematic art also thrived during this time, taking the work and learnings of what had been done before and making them more entertaining and meaningful for audiences. One of the most important figures, some would say, during that time was Charlie Chaplin, who he displayed his admiration for the working class through a character that you may know, the tramp with the mustache and the little hat. But I have to note that Mr. Chaplin's depiction of women left much to be desired, which is unfortunate because the suffrage movement in the 1920s was one that changed the trajectory of women's history in this country. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment of the Constitution was ratified. This declared that women were as deserving of the rights and responsibilities in this country as men. In that year, for the first time on Election Day, women voted. It took nearly 100 years for activists to win this right, and they faced many challenges, but they made it happen. And for all of his admiration and activism for the working class, Mr. Chaplin's depiction of women fell short. In his film, A Busy Day, he dressed up and he portrayed a woman, a suffragette, as being a manly, media-hungry woman. So you see, for all of its connection, sometimes art and its artists can be conflicted. Alas, the 1920s also saw the birth of the Harlem Renaissance. It is the foundation of Black literature and consciousness globally. Harlem was the catalyst for artistic experimentation in the 20s in the Black community in the United States, with a vibrant nightlife at places like the Cotton Club, which has been depicted in iconic films like Harlem Nights, starring Della Reese, who we actually just lost a few months ago last year. This particular era brought jazz to life. The 20s is known as the Jazz Age, born from the blues. Prohibition created illegal speakeasies where people would go and listen to what was known as devil's music. They'd sit and they'd listen and they'd drink moonshine. This was also a difficult time for Black people who couldn't vote. There was ill treatment of Blackness in this country, curfews for people with too much melanin. But within the walls of their own clubs, with their own music, they could sing, dance, play, and be free. Let's fast forward to home. Right here in the Great Lakes State, Michigan, was born what may be the most important period in American music, Motown in the 1960s. And you can call me biased because I am. I'm from Detroit, 7 miles. But who doesn't love Motown music? This art form was created by Berry Gordy, who is a Detroit native. He blended this brand of pop music with funk, rhythm, blues, and soul, and was responsible for 110 top 10 hits in the 1960s from artists like Diana Ross, The Temptations, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, The Four Tops, Jackson 5. The list goes on and on. This sound resonated with Black people, white people, brown people. This music connected the world. And artists were more connected to social activism than ever. They wrote songs. They painted on canvas. They marched on Washington. They documented the times for us. They created art to remind us of the price of freedom and the privilege of having it. Artists like Nina Simone, the musician, James Baldwin, the writer, Harry Belafonte, the actor, Barclay L. Hendricks, the painter, and you know I have to bring it back to Motown, the Temptations, the rock stars. These artists were all embraced by the person at the center of the civil rights movement, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the person who we honor this week, and as always, as he is the beacon of the dream. The young, charismatic preacher led the civil rights movement, of course, a movement that saw artists, activists, men and women, young and old, Black and white people, people of different faiths, come together in solidarity. They all desired the freedom from the patience that allowed America to think that it was okay to treat people of color, Black people, or any people inequitably. The most famous moment of this coming together was Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech of 1963. and I'm going to recite it by heart and head. I say to you today, my friends, that in spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, sweltering in the heat of injustice and oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that one day my 4 children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that in the state of Alabama, whose governor's lips are presently dripping in the words of interposition and nullification, will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls, and they'll be able to walk together as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain made low, the rough places made plain, the crooked places made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith with which I return to the South. With this faith, we shall hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we shall transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we shall be able to work together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, to thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. When we let freedom ring, from every village to every hamlet, every state to every city, we will speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. The dream of equality continued through the 1980s. With a new art form that came to light in mainstream media called hip-hop. Now, it may be more fair to call it a culture because hip-hop encompasses DJing, MCing, graffiti, beatboxing, and breakdancing. And I should also note that hip-hop can actually be traced back all the way to the 1970s. But prolific groups like Public Enemy, who wrote songs like Fight the Power, they created this new platform to speak out against the injustices in their communities. Hip-hop changed the world. Women were also taking charge in the 1980s with this new genre of music, with groups like Salt and Pepper. They boldly proclaimed their femininity without the boxes or confines of what society's standards are, of how women should look, speak, and feel. Salt and Pepper put on their spandex and their short shorts, and they shouted, "Push it real good." And so people started to push it, but not just push it real good. Hip-hop changed the world. And decades later, it continues to be a platform for social justice, with artists like Kid Cudi, Kendrick Lamar, Common, Chance the Rapper, David Banner, the list goes on and on. Art is social justice. Hip-hop artists know this. And so here we are, presently, the products of all of these artists who use the tools of theater, music, film, and other tools from the toolbox to fight for justice, for social justice. Our lives are encompassed by all of the art forms that our ancestors explored throughout the centuries. What will you do with it? What will you do with your toolbox? If you're a singer like Nina, what will you sing now? If you're a writer like James, what will you do with your pen? If you're a poet or a painter, a hip-hop artist, a film director, or a theater maker, what will you do? What will you create to move our world, our state, our cities forward? Maybe you don't consider yourself an artist. Maybe you're an athlete, or you're studying to be a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer. What will you do to make sure that the dream lives on? See, our work isn't done. I believe 2016 and 2017 were reflections of the divides that still lurk in our country's history. And while they may not be as blatant as tribal divides in Greece, or 300 years of slavery, or segregation in the 20s, or discrimination in the 60s, they still pierce, chip away at, and sicken our humanity just as brutally as they always have. That's why we use what we have to improve our world. And sometimes these gifts can show up in the most unlikeliest of places. Mine showed up on 7 Mile, on the northwest side of Detroit. That's where I grew up. From my mother, who was not going to allow her daughter to listen to Salt and Pepper, and she definitely was not going to let her push it real good. In fact, the day that she heard me listening to that song, my life was changed. I was 8 years old, and I was in my room, and I thought I was being slick and smooth. The door was closed. The boombox, yes, a boombox, was playing really low. And I thought she couldn't hear me. But of course she heard me, because mothers hear everything. And she knocked on my door, 3 very hard knocks. And when I opened it, she gave me the complete works of William Shakespeare. If I was going to recite lyrics, those were my option. And so I looked through it, and I hated it. Every lyric, every verse, every rhyme, I hated it. But over time, through repetition and a love of books and theater, I eventually fell in love with Shakespeare. And this began a journey for me of not just wanting to see people who look like me on stage in Detroit, but wanting to see people who look like me in the director's chair and in the producer's office of a theater, employing and advocating for the community that I am a part of by way of my skit experience. Equity in theater, to me, for me, and by me, means that anyone can and everyone should be able to read, portray, and convey the essence of literature and theater that is either a mirror of their own lives or a window into someone completely different than them. Because no matter what body you happen to show up in this human form, we're all worthy of the opportunity to express our multifaceted selves in ways that make sense and make room for social justice. Art is social justice. I believe my mother knew this. What I perceived as her being mean, because she wouldn't let me hang out with the people that I wanted to, but instead made me go to the theater and watch things like Cabaret or Rent or The Wiz, was social justice. What I perceived as her being mean, because she wouldn't let me watch the movies or listen to the music that I wanted to, but instead made me find myself through the exploration of books and theater with those tools. She made sure that nothing impeded my potential. She empowered me by making sure that nothing got in the way of me being myself. This was social justice for her child. Now, this is not a judgment on anyone whose parents or mother may have been different than mine, because social justice is also allowing parents to parent safely, of course, according to their own value system and circumstances. What this is recognition of my mother as my social justice warrior. Perhaps you too can relate if your mother or father, your parent, has been a beacon of the dream that you have for yourself. The 8-year-old in her room who thought her mother was so mean, now thanks her for her protection and for exposing me to art that maybe was not as familiar to some of my peers who frankly found other ways of entertaining themselves. Speaking of Shakespeare, he once wrote, "In peace, there is nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger." That's a quote from Shakespeare's Henry V, currently my favorite quote. And that's because we live in a world that can feel so uncomfortable. Going to work or going to school, going to a concert can seem dangerous, as unforeseen occurrences and terrorism seem to plague us now more than ever. In the age of social media, it can make some of us feel less inspired to be social, as trolls bully, judge, and perpetuate negativity on a daily basis, leaving some of us feeling that perhaps there is a lack of empathy. In a world of political rhetoric and news, some of us can feel like we're living in an alternate universe, or in a world where the lines are blurry between what's news, what's fake, and what's truth. Here is what Shakespeare's Henry V knew, and here is what these things tell us. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to reach into your artist's toolbox, just like our ancestors did. Now is the time to imitate the action of the tiger. The call that the Grecians heard, it's here. The desire for freedom from slavery times still lives in neighborhoods from the south side of Chicago to the east and west sides of Detroit. The dream lives on in those who march from the Black Lives Matter movement to the Women's March. The desire for equity and gender parity that the suffragettes fought for continues, and you can see it all over your local and national news and in hashtags all over social media. Hip-hop continues to impact the world. It's now a lifestyle that has made Black people who were once slaves into billionaires like Jay-Z and Diddy. And it also continues to push things like music and fashion forward. And it has ushered in white rap superstars. Hip-hop takes the unlikely and it creates opportunities for them. And it continues to change the world through the culture, emceeing, DJing, graffiti, hip-hop, beatboxing. Art is social justice. Now, I know it's not easy. The days in America these days can be very difficult. American history has had difficult days. Our world's history has had difficult days. It is not easy, and sometimes you don't know what tools from your toolbox you should use. Myself, sometimes I don't know if I want to leave the theater, to tell you the truth, and go run for office or join a movement, or spend most of my days telling other kids from 7 Mile that there's life beyond the neighborhood that you came from. But here's what I do know. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to reach deep within yourself and remember who you are. And remember what your mother taught you. We have a rich history in this country and in the world. Remember that. And be inspired. Be inspired by the music you hear, the movies you watch, by artist activists. Be an artist activist. support artist activists, and take care of yourself and each other. Self-care is social justice. And you don't need Twitter or Instagram to be social. Say hello to the person that you pass walking down the street. Call a friend. Tell them you love them. Hold their hand. Say thank you to the person who holds the door for you. Be kind to one another. Be kind to one another. Be kind to one another. You don't always have to join a movement to be active. You can be a movement by simply being kind to yourself and to those around you. Stand up for your neighbor and love them, even when they make it hard for you to do so. Advocate for them when they cannot advocate for themselves. And most importantly, remember to have fun. Remember those folks at the Cotton Club who, despite what was happening on the outside of those walls, they still sang, danced, played to be free. They enjoyed moments in their lives. Enjoy yours. Be the positive energy in the world that we all hold within us when we don't let this fast-paced, noisy world get to us. Be the light when the darkness of racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and hate of any kind based on racism, sexism, ageism, discrimination for abilities rears its ugly head in your school, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your country, and in the world. Rise up for the demo. In spite of the frustrations and difficulties of the moment, there is still a dream, deeply rooted in the American dream. When we let freedom ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will join hands and they'll sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. My name is Sam White. I'm the founder of Shakespeare in Detroit. With me this afternoon is our director of production, Cal Schwartz. It was a dream to be with you this afternoon. Thank you so much.